Hi guys, welcome to the Suzuka Deep Dive. Okay, first off, before we get started on this, there are, for essentially all of Sector 1, what I talk about, what you choose to do, will depend entirely upon your understanding of aerodynamic balance of the car and how you impact that, right? So if you don't have a good working knowledge of those ideas, then I would suggest you first go watch the video I did on aerodynamic balance before I made this deep dive, so that you can really understand what I'm talking about. Um, because it completely determines what you're going to do, all the way through the S's and Degna 1, and all of that. So, yeah, it's kind of necessary. So, what I'm going to do first is I am going to show you a quick sample that I put together of what I'm going to call the safe way to get through Sector 1, um, in case you don't have the experience, or frankly the interest in trying to do it what I'm going to call the more advanced way. Okay. So when I show you my lap here in a minute, I'm going to be using what I consider the more advanced approach to get through Sector 1. It's not going to be for everyone. Um, the the ability to control your car on the brakes is paramount, to attempting the type of lap that I'm going to show you that I ran. Um, some people may not have any interest in, frankly, putting enough work in to do that because it's hard. It takes an enormous amount of practice, So if you're one of those people who just likes to sim race and just come in and enjoy the race itself, and you don't necessarily like to spend a lot of time practicing, cool. I have zero issue with that. Or if you don't have time before this weekend in order to start trying to adopt some of the more advanced techniques, then this first segment that I'm going to show you is for you. It really is, because what I'm going to show you is what I think is a pretty traditional and safe approach to get through this section. Do I think it's going to be the fastest? No, but I do think you'll be able to get through the race with it, and you can get pretty quick using it. Don't get me wrong. It's just it's limited to a certain extent because you're not going to be using the car's full capabilities. So I want to show you this replay first, real quick, and what I really want you to pay attention to is the throttle and brake trace, because what I'm trying to do in this one is to minimize my inputs, which would disrupt the balance of the car and cause me issues in all of these fast turns that are coming up. Okay, that means I'm going to use as little brake as possible and rely on engine braking more. And to the extent that I do braking, it's mostly going to be done in a straight line. I'm not going to get fancy with my technique. Um, so that's what this is, this first segment, and I'm just going to run that through so that you can see what that looks like from the standpoint of inputs. Turn 1 is the biggest difference as far as the line goes. I'm going to cut into the apex much sooner than I normally would and use a straight line brake. And I'm going to come off the brakes completely so that I have two discrete braking zones between turn 1 and turn 2. And from there on out, I'm essentially only going to use the throttle and the engine brake to modulate my speed and the balance of the car. I think this the last left-hander here, most everyone will drop down into second gear. I did a touch of brake there just to help it slow down, but that's really it. Otherwise, I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can. Okay, and the other thing I want you to see is as I approach my entry for turn one, I want you to take note of how soon I come off of the left side of the track um, to to take a more straight line approach into the apex of turn one, because again, my goal with this technique is to stick with straight line braking as much as I can to simplify this corner complex, because it will be substantially different from what you're going to see in my actual lap. Okay, so as we're approaching the braking marker, which is going to wind up being oops, this auction sign or the access road on the left-hand side, right? As soon as we're getting past the auction sign, you'll see me start to peel away from the outside of the track, turn in, and then go heavily on the brake so that it is a much more direct approach into the apex, right? So I'm pitching the car heavily forward under braking, but I'm doing it in much more of a straight line. And then let's shift over to the in-car cam so you can see the wheel. This way, I'm doing as little heavy braking and turning of the wheel as possible. This way, although I'm pitching the car heavily, I'm not rotating the car much at all at the same time. Therefore, I'm able to control any instability. You see how I straighten up the wheel as I go heavy on the brakes? And then from here, as I start to turn a fairly traditional trail brake into come off of the brake completely, straighten the wheel again, and then go back heavy on the brake for the second braking zone. Okay? And then once again, just a standard trail brake into turn two. And then from there on out, it's just modulating everything with the throttle to get through the S's. Dab on the brake here because I'm dropping down into second. Not all cars will need to do that, you know. Just depends on how everything is geared on what you need to do there. Okay, so that's what I'm going to call the safe approach. Now let's go to my lap, and we can talk about the differences and then the corners in a little bit more detail. Okay, so this time, once again, watch the brake and throttle traces, and you're going to see that I am far more active on the brakes. through sector one. And the reason is that I am using my inputs very subtly to control the aerodynamic balance of the car so that I keep as flat of a platform as I can and therefore have more aerodynamic downforce, allowing me to take the corners at a higher rate of speed. Okay, that's the whole idea behind what I'm doing here. Keep the car flat so that I can keep a higher speed using the brakes more to turn the car, right? Putting just a little bit of weight onto the front tires so that they grip up at just the right moments. This is a much more difficult and much more subtle approach. So watch the brake and throttle trace, and I think you'll see the difference pretty obviously. Not full brake, never coming off of the brake completely, modulating the entire time. Slight touch of the brakes on the entry. Slight touch of the brakes on entry. And again. And from here it looks essentially the same as as the more basic approach type lap. Okay. Okay. So why is this approach so much harder? Pretty simple, really, because you're combining all of your inputs at the same time, right? I am attempting to combine my steering inputs and my brake inputs right at the limit so the car is balanced right there on the edge of aerodynamic and mechanical grip so that I can get the maximum amount that the car actually has to offer me rather than imposing my own limit on it by taking a different approach, right? That means that the balance of the car is less predictable because it's constantly moving around underneath me, back and forth, side to side, and I have to feel what the car is doing all the time and adjust my inputs accordingly all the way through these corners. Okay, that's hard. Um, when you watch this, I don't want you to think that this is a technique that I have come close to mastering yet. Okay, because I haven't. This is still something I am in the progress of learning how to do. Um, and that'll be obvious by the lap times. This is a good lap time. It's a 2 minute point nine, right? So I'm under the 201 barrier, and I'm starting to threaten mids. In other words, I've done laps where I've got 5, 6, 7, 2 minute 0.567 on the clock, but haven't quite been able to finish it out. So there's plenty more time to be had there, but it's still a learning process for me as well. The point is that it's a really hard technique to learn, but you have to start somewhere and at some point in order to get to the end goal of being able to do legitimately fast laps, right? It's getting to me within essentially 2 seconds of an alien best time hot lap on Suzuka, which is a big track, right? So that's good. So the technique has merit, but it's not easy to learn. So When we get into the in-car cam, you'll see how those adjustments are happening. The car is moving around underneath me much more. But first, I want you to see the turn-in point and how it differs into turn one. Because in the more basic approach, like I showed you, I come off of the line very early. That's not the case here. So I would have already been going towards the inside heavily. Instead, I'm just barely coming off of it as I get to the access road. So my entry is much wider with this approach because I am, by using a much gentler approach, I am not pitching the car nearly as much as I was on the more direct line approach, which means I'm going to be able to carry more speed because I have more aerodynamic downforce. Because of that, that means I can open up the corner more and allow the car to carry more speed into it. Still looking to apex the corner in essentially the same place, but getting there differently, and um, probably a little bit more turned at this point. I would say than I would be on the direct approach, but never quite coming off of the brake entirely. Still modulating as I go. I can tell you just from experience of playing with this here at Suzuka, I still haven't gotten to the point where I'm maximizing the speed that I'm carrying into the entry to turn two. There's still a lot more to be had there. And let's go in car, so you can see the steering wheel input at the same time. It's it's really hard to learn how to trust the aerodynamics of the car enough to carry even more speed through it. You still have a tendency to overslow the car a little bit more than you'd need to. And I can tell you that where I'm at right now with the lap, I still have a tendency to come out right here and just be going a little bit slower as I come into the entry to turn two here than I know the car is capable of. So there's a lot more to be had here than what I am currently able to do, but it's coming along. But regardless, when you this is just like the basic approach. By this point, you're going to be going into a fairly typical trail brake scenario into turn two. And it's really all about when you pick up the throttle, because you have to be a little bit careful of this inside curb. In a perfect world, I will be able to carry enough speed into my entry here to turn two that I don't get on the throttle at all until right around this point. But I'm not quite at that point yet. Because I have overslowed the car just a little bit, if I don't pick up the throttle a little bit earlier, see where I pick it up exactly. Yeah, see how I'm going onto the throttle a little bit just as soon as I get off the brakes? That's not ideal. And frankly, whether you're taking the basic approach or this more advanced approach, this is a good thing to watch in your own laps, and it's super easy to do here at turn two. What you really want is to be able to carry enough speed so that you don't have to get on the throttle right here to prevent yourself from understeering into the grass, right? Because if I were going faster at this point, I would not be on the throttle. Instead, I would still be allowing the car to slow down. The problem is, because I've overslowed the car slightly, if I don't add a little bit of throttle right here, to 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 straighten up the car to a certain extent. If I stay off of the throttle right now, the nose is going to keep turning in, and I'm going to go on the grass. Okay, so that this can be a really useful indicator of whether or not you're carrying enough speed into a corner. Is how soon do you have to pick up the throttle? Because if you have to pick up the throttle early in the corner to prevent the car from understeering into the grass, then that's a good indication that you haven't carried enough speed into it yet. Instead, you'd much rather be going a little bit faster at this point, and then as you legitimately get to your apex, you know, this is where you would really want to first start getting back on the throttle. And if not going immediately to full throttle, you'd be going heavy throttle and back to full throttle very soon. So keep that in mind for this corner and any other corner where you look back and you find yourself using the throttle to maintain a speed so that you don't understeer too far into the corner. Because if you see yourself doing that, it means you still have more meat on the bone before you get to that point. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's see. Uh, Ideally, you'll be picking up the throttle early enough so that your both of your wheels are all the way out there on the green. You know, if you're really carrying enough speed, you won't have any choice to be going out there. But as I said, I overslowed on this one a little bit, and the result is obvious. I don't use all of the track on the exit. When I do that corner right, and it's honestly it's worth 2/10 of a second when I do, then you won't see me pick up to the throttle until much later than I did, and I'll be able to get back on the throttle very hard, which will force me out onto the curbing on the left hand side on exit. But I didn't get quite get there on this one. Obviously, once you come out of turn two, it's time to get into the S's, and here it's all about rhythm and controlling the car. If you're doing the coasting only technique, then let's go back to so back when back when I was doing the only coasting technique to get through the S's, what I would use as my indicator is the red and white or red and green striping on the right hand side. Essentially, as soon as that passed out of my peripheral vision, then that was a good indicator to me that it was time to lift the throttle and get my turn in going. Now, because I'm using the brake, I can push it just a little bit farther and carry a little bit more speed. This is tricky. The car is very unbalanced all the way through the S's here. I'm using the curb, which is going to turn the car even a little bit more on all of these. So getting the timing of everything is extremely difficult. It's very easy to get on the brakes too much at any point and shift the aero balance too far forward, which means that you lose the downforce and the back end comes out from underneath you. You'll actually see it on this next corner where that's exactly what I do. I just overcooked it slightly and the car got a little bit loose on me. There's the correction right here because it started to slide. So that cost me a little bit of time, but not a huge amount. The point being is that when you're going through the S's, it is far easier to lose time than it is to gain time. So whatever it is that, whatever approach it is that you choose to take here, um, make sure it's one that you can do consistently for race day. This is another corner where I think it's easy to get the car too far to the inside. Let's see where the car, or excuse me, the corner is a relatively flat curve up through the first, half to 3/4 of the corner. It's not until right near the very end of it where the radius of the corner tightens significantly. So that is very easy to screw up because in your brain you're going to have to wind up turning a lot more before you get out of the corner completely. So it's very easy to get too much of that turning done too early in the corner and find yourself with your right wheels into the grass by the time you get to about the 3/4 way point of the corner, somewhere around your apex. So I'll give you one tip that I use in order to get through here a little bit more consistently and help prevent that from happening. You'll have to train yourself a little bit as far as this goes, but it can help a lot. So as soon as you do your downshift into second gear, so you can see that, I don't know what I have here, but maybe 60 degrees of steering angle. This moment is where I try to force myself to pause on the steering angle. In other words, I'm not trying to turn into the curbing. Instead, I'm just trying to adopt enough of a steering angle so that the front end stays away from the curb but tracks the radius of it right now. That idea helps to keep me from oversteering into the corner too early, which will put me into the grass later on. So I'll hold that until I get through the corner quite a bit more. And then it's not until I really start getting up closer to the apex where I actively try to increase the steering angle going into it. Now, this is it's important on your exit here that you not get onto the throttle too soon, because what you don't want to do is to wind up out on the middle left side of the track, because this next one is absolutely a corner that you want to set up. You have a straight that is coming up right after this corner, not an overly long one, but it is still a straight, which means your exit out of this corner has to be a priority. In order to make that a priority, you have to sacrifice your exit of the previous corner, which is the one we just came out of. So make sure that you delay getting back onto the throttle long enough so that you can work the car over here to center right in order to open up your entry into the left-hander. And let's go up here to the apex. Okay, so as I'm catching the apex here, there are a couple of things that I want. First of all, by the time I get to this point, when I'm actually getting onto the apex of the corner, I already want to be full throttle, right? I don't want this to be a gradual application of the throttle. and I don't want it to wait any longer than it has to, because this is a straight, this is where I'm going to make the most time. And if I don't achieve those, all I'm doing is losing time. So I know that this curb, and I wonder if, okay, you can see the shape of the curb. You know how it flattens out just a little bit on the top, and then there's a little bit of a ledge there. I think you'll find that if you get onto this curb and you have a significant amount of throttle on, it's going to rotate the car just a little bit. It's going to help you rotate the car. I am trying to use that. So when I get onto the throttle, I may not necessarily have the car in a position at that moment where it's going to be able to hold on to the track without going off of the right side. But I know that I'm going to get an additional amount of rotation because of the curb. So it's a combination of those two things, both my steering angle and the slight oversteer that the curb is going to give me, that actually puts the car in a position to make the corner at full throttle. Experiment with it. It's tricky, you know, but it absolutely can help you find time. Okay, so in order to do that, where you choose to do your lift on the throttle becomes very important, because I'm trying to time when the front end gets in there, you know, to the curb. If I don't time it right, then I'm probably going to have to lift off of the throttle again. So you'll see me turn in. I'm already in third by this point. I'll already be substantially turned in by the time I lift on the throttle, right? That is going to allow the weight to shift a bit onto the front tires, and the tires are going to grip and turn in very quickly at this point, which is why if you do it too soon, you're going to have to be delayed, because you're going to have to make a correction. Same thing if you do it too late, you won't get in there far enough to take advantage of the curb causing the slight amount of oversteer. So there's an extremely small window in order to do this right. But if you understand the concept that I'm talking about, with practice you can do it. So now I'm going back full throttle. I catch the curb, which oversteers the car slightly and helps me turn even further. And from there I don't have to lift. And I don't think I could have made this one any closer. Yeah, that's as close as I would want to use it. Obviously, you want to use as much of that as you can, but getting the confidence to be able to let the car swing out there wide enough to use all of the track, there's nothing but practice involved in doing that. Okay, so Degna 1 and 2. Give me one sec. Before I need to run to the restroom real quick before I go any further. Sorry, man. When nature's calls, you know what I mean? Okay, Degner 1 and 2. The first thing that I want to say about Degner 1 is that I want you to change how you think about it. Your I think the tendency is to think about it as a curb corner, right? Which is perfectly understandable. You know, I mean, I drive the Lamborghini here for Christ's sakes. I'm terrified of curbs, and it's my biggest concern. And the way it handles the inside curb here can be absolutely disastrous. Had the same problem with the McLaren when I was in it. What I'm going to tell you, however, is that I think you can help yourself immensely if you stop thinking of Degner 1 as a corner where the curb controls everything, and instead think of it as a high-speed corner um, that the single biggest factor is aerodynamic downforce. Um, that's what I want you to change, or at least think about. Because once I started, as I said, I'm still learning how to control the aerodynamic balance of the car, at that higher level. But coming back here to Suzuka for the first time since I've really started adopting that approach, the Lamborghini is now handling Degner 1 much better than ever. And the only reason that's true is because I'm treating it like a high-speed aerodynamic corner, which means that I'm being um, much more nuanced with the brake input, making an effort to keep the aerodynamic platform flat as I approach and go into my turn in, and as a result, I have better aerodynamic downforce going through this corner than I ever have, and that means that the curb doesn't bother me nearly as much as it ever has before. So um, that is the best piece of advice I can give you on this corner, is to start thinking of it as a high-speed aerodynamic corner. Okay, so let's go to the inside of the car. My brake marker is, we'll call it, 75 meters essentially. I'm halfway roughly between the 50 and the 75. My thought process on it is to be much gentler on the brake. It's not that I don't wind up using a pretty significant amount of braking force here, because I obviously do want to slow the car some, but when I apply the brakes, I'm trying to do that in a more gradual fashion so that I don't upset the balance of the car in the process and pitch it forward, right? Because if I pitch it forward, if I brake really hard, pitch the car forward, turn in, and then catch that curb, that's where everything goes to shit, okay? So when I say start thinking of it as an aerodynamic corner, that's what I mean. Control the pitch of the car a little bit better to improve the aerodynamic grip that you get, and the resulting impact of the curb will not be as significant. Notice I never go to full power on the brake. That means the car is not pitching as much. And I catch a lot of the curb here. I'd have been terrified of taking this much curb in the Lambo before. Because the car is flatter, that means I am able to get back on the throttle more heavily and more confidently, because it is simply not moving around underneath me as much as it used to. Okay. Let's do that again at full speed, so you can get a little bit better look at the brake application. I mean, that's just that's just a lot damn more subtle, you know. And the car simply isn't moving and pitching as much underneath me as it used to. And it's made a world of difference. There's no question that approach is what's allowing me to break the 201 barrier and start thinking about going even lower. Um, okay. As far as Degner 2 goes, you want to use all of this on the left-hand side. You just want to make sure that your right side tires don't cross over the white line, because that's where you're going to get into the track violations warning. I also think, depending on the car and the ride height setup and all of that, that if you get too far to the left and go onto your braking, then it the car can bottom out pretty easily up here. So I think you want to be a little careful about that. However, what I do think the difference the difference between getting through here okay and getting through here quickly is how soon you start to turn the car in. Because let me go forward just a little bit here. That green patch. Sorry, I need to back up a little bit because I didn't show you soon enough. Okay, so on the green AstroTurf on the far left, right, the big wide patch. I don't mean the skinny bright green patch. You can see how it has different shades to it, right, where it's lighter and darker on that. It's those shadings that I'm looking at in order to determine my braking zone. So as I'm coming over the first dark patch here, I get into a light patch, and it's right as my nose is approaching that second dark patch. That is when I'm going on the brakes. Okay. The trick here is the angle of the car that you hold under braking, because what I'm aiming for is to keep the car out towards the end of the curb where it borders the white line. I think the big mistake that's easy to make here, and I've made it myself for the longest time, is to start turning in too early and increasing the effect that this corner has on the back end, because as I'm sure you all know, it can get very loose at the apex and immediate exit of this corner where you go back on throttle. So you really do want to open this corner up a lot, and I think it's very easy to allow yourself under braking to drift too far to the inside and narrow the radius of the corner more than you need to. If you can train yourself to stay a little bit wide and just do a normal trail brake into the apex, I think you'll find that you can get back on the throttle early and forcefully without having nearly as much rear end slippage as you will if you close this corner down too much by mistake. Right, so trail brake right up to the apex. The other big thing is as soon as you start getting back on the throttle, make sure that you are starting to open up the steering. Keep in mind that you have a lot of runoff out here on the left side. It is also slippery, but that is a problem for later, not right now. What you don't want is you don't want to hold the steering angle heavily over here as you get back on the throttle, because that's going to increase the likelihood that the back end starts sliding out from you due to power oversteer. So you need to start opening up the steering wheel at this point as you go back onto the throttle, so that that isn't as much of a problem. Let it run all the way out here. It is not uncommon in the Lamborghini, and I think a few other cars too, because of the amount of torque that you have at this point, to get a little bit more power oversteer because of how slippery the left side can be over here. But honestly, you've got to be full throttle here, so that's just a question of you've just got to be able to control the car, you know. Okay, the kink before the hairpin is critical. Let's go up to the hairpin itself first, because that is going to determine what happens. Okay. This always feels like a little bit of a weird shaped hairpin to me. I find it to be a very easy one to be inconsistent through, you know. Um, and I'm not entirely sure why that is, but it is. It may be in part because in the Lamborghini, it's really hard to maintain a eyesight, you know, with the apex, because I have such a huge A pillar, and it makes it hard to really judge exactly where I am at all times. But there's no question that what I want is I want to be back on the throttle as soon as I can, with a late apex, because we have a very long straight coming up, and I need to maximize that as much as possible, right? I have tried to intentionally do a double apex at this corner, and it doesn't seem to work. So if you can pull it off, that's fine, but there's something about the shape of this corner that just never has quite seemed to work for me as far as doing a double apex, which is strange to me because the overall shape of it kind of screams in a way for a double apex, but I can't get it to work. So I'm absolutely looking for a single late apex in this corner, so that I can get back on the throttle and carry as much speed down the straight as possible. Because I'm looking for a single late apex, that means I want a wide entry into this corner, and that means I need to be wide, at least center of the track to center right, as I'm coming onto it under braking, right? And because of that, that determines what you do here at the kink. Because in order to position your car where you want to under braking for the hairpin, you have to be able to line it up properly going through the kink. Okay, and I will say this right now: I'm going to be talking next week when we do the Barcelona deep dive. I'm going to be talking about compromises a lot. And this is an area where I think that if you can't get this down, then you need to compromise right here, right? Because the exit of the hairpin is too important to sacrifice, because it's such a long straight after it. Um, whatever speed and time you think you can make up here at the kink or on the entry is nothing compared to the time you're going to lose on the straight if you don't get the exit to the hairpin correct. So Understand that what I'm about to tell you is, I think, ideal, but if you can't get to the ideal, then I'm going to suggest that you make a compromise here so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot on the exit of the hairpin. Um, I am going to be aiming my car so that the right wheels brush right over the top of the red and white striped curbing, and my car is as parallel as I can get it to the white boundary line on the right hand side. Okay, so that's my goal coming through the kink. That allows me to then go heavy on a straight line brake. You can see the camber that starts to come in to the corner, and that will naturally push you right to the center of the track and into an excellent position to trail brake and nab that late apex and good exit. Okay. Um, One of the things that I will tell you that helped me when I was first working on getting this right is that when I would get to this point, the part of the apex, the part of the kink that I am aiming for is not visible right now, and it doesn't become visible until you're already committed to wherever you're going, through the kink. So one visual trick that I would use to help myself learn exactly where the turn in needs to be to position the car where I wanted to is that at this point in the track, I would move my eyes straight to the white boundary line on the right hand side, and I would track that up to the apex. That seemed to help me learn exactly where the turn in needs to be and how hard it needs to be in order to catch the kink where I want to catch it. Because you have to wait, you have to wait a long time and turn in very hard. And it's very easy to turn in too early and never be able to get the car over far enough to get it lined up the way I want to. So I would use that little trick of following tracing the track with the boundary line in order to get used to where I need to delay the turn into so that I can position the car correctly. I would say that another thing I'll point out is that one thing I find, let's go to the I want to see exactly where I finish my trail brake here because I feel like I would rather in this corner be done with my trail brake a little bit earlier rather than a little bit later. Um, there's a lot of camber in the corner, and it will continue to turn the car effectively on its own, so that you don't need to slow as much as your brain tells you do. So if you're a habitual trail breaker like I am, you have a tendency in this corner, I think, to carry the trail brake just a little bit too far and bleed off more speed than you actually need to. So if you're uh, how do I put this? I guess what I can tell you is my mindset on the brakes in this is that I would rather be done braking too early than too late, if that makes any sense. That's my mindset when I'm coming through the first and middle part of the corner is not to stay on my brakes very long. Try to get off of them as quickly as I can. Still a trail brake, but I don't want to hold it for very long. And then just floor it as soon as you can. Open up your steering as quickly as you can. Don't hold it there, otherwise you're going to run into the same problem of increasing the likelihood of a power oversteer. So open up the steering and aim, let the car aim straight out here to the right hand side, and then make another adjustment once it's stabilized itself a little bit. Okay. Let's see. We're going to be full throttle for quite a while, all the way around the big right-hander here. And then we get into spoon, which is an exceptionally difficult corner complex as well. Probably very close to being as hard as turn 1, turn 2, if not quite as hard. It's certainly in the ballpark. Okay. And this is another one where I'm going, just like I was saying in Degner 1, you need to treat the entry to spoon as a high-speed aerodynamic corner. Because what you will have a tendency to do is to overslow the car, pitch it too far forward, screw up the aerodynamic balance in the process, making the back end loose and forcing you to slow the car even more before you can attempt to turn in. Okay, so you'll see me take a very, what I'll call standard now, high-speed corner approach to this, where I'm very mindful of the aerodynamic platform. There's a couple of brake references that you can use depending on how advanced you are as far as tackling this corner. The first one that I always used to use before I got better at it was a light pole on the right-hand side. So as I come around, you can see the light pole, the first one that's off here to the right side. That was my first braking reference that I ever used, and I would just wait until it passed out of my peripheral vision before I would go on to the brakes. And if you are still in the early stages and you're not confident enough yet on the brakes, and you're really pretty heavily dependent on a straight line braking approach, that's probably the best brake marker to use, is the light pole on the right hand side, because it'll give you enough time to slow the car down and to come off of the brakes and reestablish the aerodynamic platform before you make your turn in. But if you're going for the more advanced approach, then I'm looking at the beginning of the green curbing on the right-hand side and the access road that you see right there in front of it. Those are what I use as my braking reference now. And just as I'm coming up to the access road and it becomes visible, that's where I'm going on to the brakes. Once again, you can see I'm not getting to full power on the brakes. I'm using a much more gradual approach to keep the aero balanced. That will allow me more aerodynamic downforce, able to carry more speed. From there, it's a straightforward trail brake, but the timing is tricky. There's no question about it. To catch this apex, you want to the second half of the corner is probably harder than the first half. I think the entry is relatively straightforward, even if you're using the more advanced approach. But the timing of everything from here on out gets super tricky. Because you want to get back on the throttle as soon as you can, but you don't you don't want to run too wide. I'm as far as I would ever want to be on this lap. You also don't have a really great braking reference, but let's go a little bit farther forward before we get to that. Because the exit to spoon, the second turn here, just keeps going forever, it feels like, where it seems like it gets tighter and tighter as you go through it. And as I'm sure you know, this is a place where the car can get very, very loose on you, either on the entry, mid corner, or exit. So it's extremely tricky. And I wish that I had a really good tip or secret for you, but I don't, because I think it's probably the corner where I consider myself the farthest away from mastering. Um, what I can tell you is that I'm using the end of the curb. I'm looking at the end of the red and white striping as my reference for when I'm going to go back on the brake. I'm going to drop down to second gear, but this is one of those middling corners where you're using both a lot of aerodynamic grip and mechanical grip mixed together. And it feels very easy to just lose the overall balance of the car at any point. What I don't want is it's super easy to overslow the car. So this is one of those where you'll find that you slowed the car too much, and if you don't pick up the throttle early, the car is going to steer right into the grass. But by the same token, if you don't slow it enough, it never seems to want to turn in because it's like off camber. So so I'll dab the brakes not very hard, and then just try to hold the car in a fairly neutral position in the middle of the track for as long as I feel like I can. But I frequently still get to this where you can see that I'm picking up the throttle right now, and I'm nowhere near the apex yet. So this is another case where I have slowed the car more than I want to. I should be going faster, but I'm not. And if I don't pick up the throttle, the car is going to steer right into the grass. Um, You can see how I'm just holding it there, not really doing anything. I'm not accomplishing anything at this point. So it's still a very frustrating corner for me in a lot of cases. But regardless, you've got to be patient on the throttle because it just keeps turning and turning. And if you get onto it too soon, then the back end's going to step out on you, and you can easily wind up on the wall on the left. But once you can, then obviously you just go full throttle. You've got plenty of exit curb to work with over here. Use it. If the car isn't forced out onto all the way out onto the green out here to the right, it means you're not getting onto the throttle early enough. And that could be a combination with you holding the steering too long. You need to know that you have that extra room on the exit and anticipate that by opening up the steering early so that you can get on the throttle earlier. It's a combination of those factors, and then just feeling the grip of the back when you have it and when you don't. But there's nothing simple about it. $130R probably has more to do with the setup that you wind up going with than anything else. I know of no car that can take it flat out in ACC. So it's going to be some variation of a lift or a tap on the brakes, and whether you take it in fifth or sixth gear will depend on how the car is geared. I think that that will largely determine where your lift occurs and where your turn-in point occurs. For me, in the Lamborghini, the 50 meter board is what I use. It is where I do everything all at the same time. A very hard turn-in combined with a lift and a downshift into fifth gear, and then back onto the throttle as soon as I possibly can. Nothing complicated about it. It's just a question of getting all of the timing down right. The one thing that you really have to avoid is getting your wheels over the curb onto the left side of the curb and into the grass. If you do that, that's absolutely going to unsettle the car and Best case scenario is you have to wait a very long time for it to restabilize before you can get back on the throttle. Worst case, the bouncing completely screws up the aero balance that you're working so hard to maintain through this corner, because I'm at the apex. I'm 240 kilometers an hour, and I'm depending on every ounce of downforce that I have at this point. If the car starts bouncing, you lose that aerodynamic balance and your downforce at the same time, and the back end is going to go right up from under you at a very high rate of speed, and you're screwed. So, whatever you do, oops, that's not the way I wanted to go. Whatever you do, whatever timing mechanism you wind up using in your particular car to get through this corner, make sure that it keeps you off of the inside of this curb, because the death of your race is right here, 6 inches too far to the left. Right? You can see I'm just straddling it right now. If I go, any further, then I'm risking death. So keep that in mind. If you have to make a compromise here, make a compromise that allows you to stay in the race and doesn't spin you and put you into the wall. And when I just said that, I reminded myself that I was going to say something about a compromise here at the entry to the kink. And I completely blew past it. Okay, I had said that, look, in an ideal world, you want to do something similar to what I'm doing here at the kink before you enter the hairpin. But if you can't, for whatever reason, if you can't get the feel of that where you're able to get the car turned well enough to be the right side of the track as you come out of the kink, right? Then rather than allowing yourself to wind up on the left side of the track when you go under braking, I think you are better off making a compromise right here at the entry to the kink, and that will take the form of either a bit of a lift, right as you're getting to this point, because that will allow you to turn a little bit better. If you're really new at this track, do a downshift into third to give yourself more time to get the car lined up. Whatever it is you have to do in order to consistently get the car positioned here on the right side of the track and lined up parallel to the white boundary line. That would be my priority. If you can do it at full speed, that's great. But if you practice it and you're just not going to be able to get a handle on it by the time we race this weekend, I think you're better off doing a little bit of a lift at the entry to the kink in order to get the car, to help you get the car positioned right here. So that's my thought as far as compromise goes. Okay. The chicane is a devilish little beast, and let's go up here to the exit, because that will do a lot to determine what you do beforehand. Okay, so obviously, as soon as you come out of the exit, it immediately turns to the right, okay? And to make matters worse, if you get too far to the right, if you put a wheel off here, or just kind of hook this curb badly, then particularly if the track conditions aren't optimum yet, then it's very easy to get the back end sliding around on you here. Okay, so you need to understand that. Having said that, in order to maximize your lap times, you must absolutely be able to have your car in this position at full throttle. If you don't, you're giving time away. So when you when you exit the left-hand turn, your priority is to get back onto the throttle as quickly as you can without upsetting the back end of the car, right? And if you are not getting on the throttle early enough, you're going to know that because your car is going to stay out here on the gray stuff entirely, and you're losing time. Okay, so if your exit speed from the left-hander does not force you out into this very uncomfortable position all the way out here onto the right side, you're giving time away. Okay? My advice to you is, first of all, that you need to compromise your entry exit, into the right-hander so that you can achieve a car position at this point that is something similar to this, closer to the middle of the track, so that you can open up the left-hander, right? That is what will allow you to get back on the gas early enough to take full advantage of the approach that I'm talking about. So if you are getting to this point in the track and your car is positioned over to the left side of the track, I think you've made the wrong compromise. You've given up the wrong portion of the corner to maximize your lap times. So from working backwards, you need to be on the all the way on the curb on the exit, and in order to get there, you've got to be in the middle of the track here so that you can open up the corner enough to fully catch the curb at the apex and then go immediately full throttle as soon as you get enough grip, right? You're going to have to be a little patient on the throttle because the grip sucks right here. But that's what you're chasing in my mind. You can see that I'm in second gear. That's absolutely intentional because of the low grip that you're going to have coming over the curb and on the exit here. Being in second gear reduces the torque a little bit and allows you to get back on the throttle with much greater confidence. So I think you're almost certainly going to want to be in second gear as you come through the left-hander. Having said that, whether you are in first or second gear, when you go into the right-hander, I think is absolutely a question of car and style. I am finding it easier in the Lamborghini to stay in second gear as I make my entry into the right-hander. That may not be the case for you, and if it's not, by all means, use first gear. But if you go into first gear, then I think you're going to want to short shift into second, probably somewhere around here, right? That's my guess. So keep that in mind. You have options there. I think you're going to want to be in second on the left-hander, but I think you have a choice between first and second on the right-hander. Okay, as far as the entry itself goes, let's go back to the cockpit. I'm using the 100-meter board, and I'm essentially braking right about 125 meters, so roughly the halfway point between the 100 and the 150 meter board. But I can push it, I think, relatively close to the 100-meter board, in part because I'm staying in second gear and using the momentum of the car to roll me over the curb here at the first apex. So I'm trying to get off of the brake as soon as I've got the turning angle, and then just letting it roll, picking up the throttle a little bit. This is where you would be short shifting into second if you were taking the right-hander in first gear. Back off, let it go over the second one, and then back on the throttle as quickly as possible, opening my steering up so that I can get back on the throttle earlier. And then I'm just managing the grip and tracing the front tires on the curb. That's going to help me turn right here. But that way I don't have to get back off the throttle again. And that is a lap at Suzuka. Let's check the time on this. It was just barely got into the twos, which is, it's still difficult for me to do. I can hit a 201 flat, 201.1 pretty easily, but breaking that barrier is still a challenge for me. So 2 minutes, 0.933. I think I might be able to get that down closer to a 0.5 by the end of the week. It just depends on how things go. Okay, let's do the full lap. And obviously in this deep dive, I've talked a lot about what happened. Oh, wrong lap, dumbass. I've talked a lot about, managing the aero balance and using the brakes, that sort of thing, being more nuanced on them. That's a fairly advanced technique, but if you doubt me on that at all, go watch your favorite Alien, particularly at like here at Suzuka or at Silverstone, that sort of thing, where there are a lot of high-speed corners, and watch how mid-corner they will be using the just tiny little adjustments on the brakes constantly. It's a very advanced technique, and it's very hard to learn. But if your goal is to eventually get into that upper tier realm of lap times, it's a skill that you're absolutely going to have to learn. So pay attention to that next time you watch those guys and you watch their laps, whether it's somebody's hot lap or during a race, whatever the case is. If they're fast and you like watching them and you're wondering how they do the things they do, pay really a close attention to their brake trace, and you'll see them making very tiny adjustments with their brakes all the time. And it's one of the big differences that separates them from those of us who are mortal. Okay, do the overhead view. And what I will suggest if you want to start learning that more advanced technique, and what I'm really talking about is the high-speed corner braking technique, because I think it's a little bit easier to learn on the lower speed stuff. Much more difficult on the high-speed stuff, because your goal is to balance that platform, and it's hard to learn how to do. Practice that at Silverstone. Set up a hot lap session. And I would suggest giving yourself to begin with, give yourself a very stable car, with little to no rake and very high maxed out wing, so that the car is as stable as you can make it while you initially learn. And just work your way through all the way from the start and all the way through stow, and just practice getting the feeling for using less brake, but in a more nuanced, modulated fashion, um, until you can really start feeling what that actually means, and how it affects the balance of the car. You'll wreck a bunch, but that's the beauty of that practice session, is that all of those corners you need to work on are right there in the first part of the lap. So you can screw up, reset back to the garage, start over and do it again. You'll find after enough practice that it gets a little bit easier, and you can start adding a little bit of rake, to the car, so that it turns easier, and feel what it would actually feel like in a race type situation with it closer to a setup that you'll legitimately be using. But that's my suggestion for how to start learning how to do that. And then once you start getting a feel, then you can begin taking that feeling to other tracks which have similar types of corners, like here at Suzuka. And that's it for Suzuka. Hope this helps, guys. If you have any questions, give me a shout. Obviously, it's an amazing track, but it's extremely technical, and it's much easier to lose time than it is to gain time. So we all have our work cut out for us at this one. So enjoy your prep this week. I'll see you on the server and at the track on Sunday. Take care. Later.